right. Wow. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Recovery Resources here in Claremont. We have a really exciting program for you tonight. I'm Heather Stockwell. If I haven't met you yet, I hope to get to know you. Come up and introduce yourself, and we'll start there. I'll give you my card. We can have coffee. I am super thrilled that we have a packed house tonight, and I'm super thrilled that some of my colleagues from the Monadnock region and the Monadnock Progressive Alliance are here. I think there's about 5 of them in the house tonight. Woo woo! All right, MPA. Please also feel free to reach out to any of the MPA members that are here tonight. This is sort of a model that we are using in other parts of the state to start sort of activist and advocate chapters. So right now in the state, we have 3 different organizing groups, one in Monadnock region, one in Manchester, and one in Nashua, and we have a baby start of a chapter here in Claremont. Woohoo! So let's talk about that. We could also talk to Pat. Pat is going to come up and tell you a little bit about that. We've been working on education, and we hope to have a healthcare group started up soon. But it's really nice to see that all of you are out for this broad range of topics that really affect all of us on a daily basis and affect our communities. I am going to turn it over. Yeah, you're still here? Okay. It's my pleasure to introduce Wayne Miller. Wayne is the director of the Recovery Center here, and he is his wife. Well, he is, and his wife or partner are expecting a baby at any minute. So we were just
She just called me. I was like,
does he have to run out the door?
Contracting all day.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it to Wayne to just tell you for a few minutes about the work that they do here at the Recovery Center.
All right, so thank you everybody for being here. I'm happy to host this event. So the Recovery Center opened this past July. I've been the manager of the previous Recovery Center here in town. It closed due to lack of funding, despite, I'm sure you hear opiate pop up every day, and yet there's still funding issues. So thankfully, we were able to pull things together, community came together here in Claremont, and then at the state level, and we opened this new center. So here, a big focus for my work is to let people know that it's not just about opiates, that addiction is addiction. So whether that's gambling or the internet or relationships or food, we provide support in all of those arenas through peer-based recovery coaching. We host meetings in groups, recovery planning, we do a lot of outreach, we do groups in the jail. So wherever we can provide that need for support, we want to be able to be there. So please let people know about the center and what we do here. Also, another reason that I was happy to host this is that I know one of RAD's focuses is on equality and bringing support and voice to people of color in rural Vermont and New Hampshire. And last night, I officially launched, finally, after working on it for a year, youth mentoring program that I started called Living Proof for Black youth in Vermont and New Hampshire. We had our first gathering last night. Some of the info about that over on the table. And the purpose for creating that program is pretty obvious. I mean, this room and the demographics here is a complete example of that. I am the only Black 15 here. And so that's why I created this program. So kids grow up in Vermont, New Hampshire, sometimes being the only Black child in their school. And this provides mentorship and youth gatherings for Black children to get together, see themselves reflected in other people, and have that support. So please spread the word on that. And I hope you guys have a great session. I'm going to go because she did call again. Thank you, and I hope you go.
Good evening, everybody. My name is James Haslam with the Rights and Democracy, and it's really a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you, Wayne, so much for hosting us, and good luck. It's really, special to be here tonight. It's special to be here on this subject in this place. when we poll our communities, what are the things that our communities are most concerned about, right at the top of the list is the opiate overdose crisis. And what that is doing to our families and our communities. Huge issue. Big priority that people want to have resources for community resources like this to be able to help our communities heal and recover and be strong and thrive together. And so why we're here today is because the problem is in our country, that isn't a top priority. The top priority by far is the level of spending that is happening on a wasteful military Pentagon program, which we believe we can't afford any longer. So the topic of investing in prosperity and shared prosperity and peace is something for Rights and Democracy that we are doing as an organization, because we believe that for us to be able to fulfill the promise of our country, we need to change our priorities dramatically. And that in the road to this, we just had an important election in 2018, and the road in 2020, from now until then, is probably the most important 2 years of our lifetimes. And an argument, I think, could be made when you factor in climate change and the ecological crisis that is happening, the most important 2 years for humanity. So we feel like this next period that happens in places like New Hampshire, where we have a debate about where the future of our country should be happening, where should be going, that this issue has to be at the forefront in ways that it's never been before. So we're very excited to be here. For folks that signed in and were very observant, you saw a petition, Priorities 2020. We support investing in peace and shared prosperity. It's pretty short, and I just want to read it since not everyone had a chance to read it on the way in. Our national budget is a moral document that must reflect our values. Today, our country spends $700 billion, over half the entire federal discretionary budget, on the Pentagon. That's more than twice as much as China and Russia combined. And it costs each New Hampshire taxpayer more than $3,000 per year. Meanwhile, Americans battle hunger, poverty, low wages, lack of jobs and health care, crumbling schools and infrastructure, and unsafe water poisoning our children. We must reorient our national priorities towards the well-being of our people and our children and ensure all our neighborhoods thrive. We therefore call on an end to an excessive Pentagon spending, to invest in a new social contract for American families, beginning with Medicare for All and a Green New Deal, and expanding to address all of America's needs. So that is something I would that is something that we hope that not only we will sign tonight, but that we'll be able to take out through communities throughout the state to show a big popular mandate for moving in that direction. We've been talking about this within Rights and Democracy actually quite a bit since our membership assembly, which happened a little south of here, hosted by the Monadnock Progressive Alliance. Some of those leaders are here tonight. And we had invited to help inspire us that night, that day, one of the leaders in our country that has been helping build a progressive movement. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard was our keynote speaker, and this was essentially the subject of what she spoke at and inspired us on there, was that if we care about Medicare for All and universal health care and housing and having clean water and addressing the climate crisis, if those are things that are important to us, then it's time for those movements to join and build a peace movement, and that those things go hand in hand or interconnected. So when we had the opportunity to have Congresswoman Gabbard join us, and then also bring one of our founding leaders of Rights and Democracy, who's been working on this issue for decades, national leader on two subjects, the mispriorities of military spending and the deeply connected subject of the money in politics that is drowning out Americans' voices on behalf of large corporations towards the top of the list, the fossil fuel industry and the defense industry. So we were able to bring Ben Cohen, the co-founder of Ben & Jerry's, down with us tonight. Me and Ben drove down together. So we are very lucky tonight to have two of the leaders of this country who have been raising this issue of putting the needs of Americans and the needs of our communities first, and investing in our communities in a way that is not only destroying and killing people around the world, but also is just an incredibly irresponsible place to be putting our dollars, our public dollars, in that direction. So we are very excited to have standing room only group of people on a Saturday night that are ready to help build us this movement with us. And please join me in giving a warm welcome for my friend Ben Cohen.
And Tulsi, it's a double scoop for Claremont. Thank you so much for coming out. It's good to be here in Claremont. It's last time I was in these parts was when I was campaigning for Bernie. So it's good to be back again, and I really appreciate you all coming out. Every couple of years, politicians, congresspeople run for office, and they tell us how much they care about our kids and our schools and healthcare. And then once they get elected, Congress decides how they're going to divvy up the $1 trillion discretionary budget. And every year, it seems, over half of it goes to the Pentagon. And then when we come to our congresspeople and we say, hey, we'd like to get some more money for education or health care or addiction services or housing, they say, well, gee, I'd really like to help you, but we just don't have any money. Well, I think it's high time for us to come right out and say it. The emperor has no clothes. The Pentagon is killing us. It's killing us in two ways. First, it's creating enemies faster than we can kill them. There's no such thing as surgical strikes, and you cannot kill terrorism. Think about it. We're bombing whole villages into rubble and expecting the people who live there not to hate us. That's crazy. The reality is that we've proven time and time again that our strategy is tragically flawed. We are creating enemies faster than we can kill them. And it's going to take the common sense of people like us all over the country to stand up and tell them that. Even General Stanley McChrystal, who is the head of operations in Afghanistan, said that military attacks likely create more insurgents, quote, because each one you kill has a brother, father, son, and friends. But the worst part is the moral depravity of it all. It was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King who said that a nation can never achieve absolute security, but it can easily bankrupt itself financially and morally by attempting to achieve that security through arms alone. You know, I want to be very, very clear that I support and respect our troops on the ground, the frontliners. I mean, they are courageous, they are brave, and they are professional. The issue that I have is with the top brass in the Pentagon and their enablers in Congress and the collusion that both of them have with corrupt defense contractors. So there's two things that are going on here. The first is that we're killing thousands of innocent people like us, like you and me, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, and we're maiming hundreds of thousands, and we're forcing millions who cannot come back to their bombed out villages to become refugees. And then there's the thousands of our own soldiers who are killed, the tens of thousands who are injured, and the hundreds of thousands that come back suffering from mental and emotional problems. Well, the second way the Pentagon is killing us is through economic violence. Economic violence is the act of choosing to spend money in a way that results in death, disease, and degradation. And it's aimed disproportionately at people who have the least. When our money gets spent on a giant killing machine, it cannot get spent on the things that we need at home for the middle class and on down the line. We are literally killing low-income people by dropping economic bombs which force them to live in toxic housing with peeling lead paint, drink poisoned water, and polluted air. You know, Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha, who is an expert on lead poisoning, said that if you were going to put something in a population to keep them down for generations to come, it would be lead. Today in our country, there are 3.5 million kids living in houses with peeling lead paint. It would cost about $5 billion to get rid of that, to ameliorate that whole situation. You know, and $5 billion, it sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But let's put it in perspective. I mean, we're talking about billions here. A billion is a huge number. Does anyone think, well, how many seconds do you think are in a year? I mean, would that be a billion? Does anybody think that's a billion? A year's worth? Right, no. How about 5 years worth of seconds? Would that be a billion? 10 years? That's gotta be a billion. It's not. A billion is 33 years worth of seconds. It is an unfathomable number. So Congress claims that we don't have enough money to prevent poisoning our children, or hiring more teachers, or debt-free college, while we continue to spend over $700 billion per year on the Pentagon. Now, they want us to say, well, you know, we're just, regular people walking around the street. How are we supposed to know how much money we need to spend to defend ourselves. I mean, I got no idea, how much does an aircraft carrier cost? How many aircraft carriers do we need? And that's what they want. They want it to be so obtuse that we say, we need to leave it to the experts, because we have no idea what's going on. But I'm telling you, we got a hell of a lot more common sense than they do. And the big thing is, we are not corrupted by all the money that's floating around in their pockets. So how much should we spend? I mean, should we spend, more than our potential adversaries? I don't know, maybe. But to put it in perspective, China spends 1/3 of what we spend each year. And you know how much Russia spends? This big bull that we hear so much about? They spend 1/10 on their military than what we spend on ours. And the terrorists, of course, they don't spend doodly squat. Well, I know this is all kind of abstract, but I want to give just one example of what's going on in our name and with our money. So I'm going to do, toward the end of World War II, the US dropped a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima. And here's what happened. 70,000 people got killed immediately. Another 70,000 were injured. And another 120,000 died eventually from radiation-related causes. So I want to give you an idea now of the size of our current nuclear arsenal. And I'm going to do that by dropping some BBs into this watering can. Usually it's a bucket, but I couldn't find my bucket, and this is all I could find at home. So in this demonstration, each BB equals the equivalent of 15 Hiroshima-sized bombs. And here's what it sounds like. And now I'm going to drop in enough BBs to blow up most of the major cities in Russia. That was 6 BBs. And now I'm going to put in the amount of BBs that represents our total nuclear arsenal. So that was 10,000 BBs, the equivalent of 150,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. And now, the Pentagon, already the biggest polluter in the United States, wants to spend another $1.5 trillion on building a new generation of nuclear weapons. So this is not an issue about our soldiers who put their lives on the line. This is an issue of a Pentagon bureaucracy gone berserk, in collusion with a corrupt military-industrial congressional complex. And that's just one example of the mentality that runs rampant at the Pentagon. Just another self-serving bureaucracy trying to get as much as it can for itself. And that results in economic violence. If we took just 15% of that $700 billion a year that's spent on the Pentagon, that would be $100 billion. It's enough money to provide decent housing, drinking water, education, jobs, and health care for the people who are the current targets of this economic violence. You know, I know this is a little heavy, but it's going to get better. A lot of times, the Pentagon and weapons manufacturers like to defend themselves by saying that one of their major benefits is that they're a jobs program. Well, the reality is that they're really a rather poor jobs creator when you compare it to other ways you could spend money. For every $1 billion spent on the Pentagon, you would create 150% more jobs in the energy or healthcare industry. That's the clean energy or healthcare industry. And you would create 225% more jobs in education. So there is hope. There is a way to right these wrongs. There is enough to go around. We have more than enough money to do it. Our country, the last remaining superpower on earth, needs to learn to measure its strength not in terms of how many people we can kill, but in terms of how many people we can feed, clothe, house, and care for. It is great to be here working with the bold, courageous, and stalwart members of Rights and Democracy. I am psyched that we will finally be able to take on this issue as this presidential campaign goes forward. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ben. Please, another round of applause for Ben. You can look up on YouTube and see Ben doing all kinds of similar, very helpful, powerful demonstrations. Not only using BBs, using Oreo cookies, using all kinds of stuff. It's very helpful and very helpful for all of us to get our heads around the enormity of the mispriorities in our country. I'm very pleased to be able to once again introduce one of the boldest leaders in our country. When we were thinking about who we wanted to speak at our membership assembly, back in September, we were thinking, who could really inspire us at this moment? We're in some pretty tough times. You look at the news every day. They're doing terrible things, to people at the border. Doing terrible things for people around the world. There's so much suffering. You look at the local news. We're losing loved ones and friends to the opiate crisis. We need some inspiration, and we're also coming up against an incredibly powerful establishment. And so when we invited Tulsi Gabbard to come speak to us, it was because she has shown throughout her career a willingness to stand up and do what's right against powerful interests, even when it's tough. I'll never forget, seeing the news when during the Standing Rock fight, when people from all around the country were standing with the Sioux who were putting their lives on the line. And seeing that the veterans were coming to stand with them in solidarity, and that Tulsi Gabbard, as a major in the Hawaiian National Guard, was with them in that situation. That speaks volumes. I mean, we have, as Ben was saying, there is right now a revolving door between Congress, these defense contractors, these huge corporations, and people in Congress. The amount of political power that those fossil fuel companies have and exercise. Having a congresswoman is willing to go and stand with protesters standing up, just amazing. And the other thing, in terms of bold things that have impacted our whole country, you think about going back to February 29th, 2016, day after the South Carolina primary. Senator Sanders had just lost by almost over 40 points, landslide loss. And then the headlines that day talked about that, but they also talked about this brave congresswoman who came out and had endorsed him, resigning as vice chair of the DNC. Huge. That's the kind of bold leadership and people we need championing the movements we're building. And so we're very excited that Tulsi was able to join us for this special event. Thank you so much.
Doesn't matter where you are in the country or how cold it is outside, aloha always brings that warmth from within your heart out into those around you. So thank you all so much for coming out and joining us tonight for this very important conversation. Thank you, James and Heather and your team from Rights and Democracy for organizing this. And I know Wayne took off, but let's say thanks to Wayne for hosting us here and wish him and his wife well. The title of this forum tonight, Investing in Peace and Prosperity. Why is this so important to us? You just heard from Ben a number of reasons why this is so important. Yes, it's important to those of us who are veterans, those of us who have served and worn the uniform and deployed and seen some of our friends killed, paying that ultimate sacrifice. It's important to us who have had the blessing to be able to come home to our loved ones, to still be alive today, but to see far too many of our friends suffering with wounds that are both visible and invisible, dealing with this burden of the cost of war every single day of their lives. And they don't do it alone. They do it with their family members, with their loved ones, their spouses, their children, their parents. And far too many of them still, after surviving not one, not two, but 3, 4, and sometimes even more deployments into combat, come home only to lose that battle and end up taking their own lives. When we talk about peace, this is what we're talking about for us. It's very personal. With less than 1% of the population in this country serving in uniform today, there are fewer people in this country who are experiencing this direct cost of war than I think any generation before in history. If you go back to Vietnam and to World War II, it has a different impact. And one of the results is, as you go through these election cycles, as Ben was talking about, how often are people raising the question, challenging people who are seeking to serve in some of the highest offices in the land on their position? Where do they stand on this question of war and peace? Do they have foresight to understand what the cost and consequences of war are? Do they understand what it means to be charged with that heavy responsibility of deciding when and where our men and women in this country will be sent into harm's way? And for what will they be fighting for? What objective will they be seeking to accomplish? And whose interest does that objective serve? How often do you hear these questions being asked of those running for federal office in this country? Where is our peace movement? There are many people who will call themselves progressives, who will be among those beating war drums the most, thinking that somehow when there are bad things happening to people in other parts of the world, that the answer is to go and drop more bombs, to launch more regime change wars. When the reality is that those decisions end up costing more for the people in those countries, who they may honestly be trying to help but not thinking through the consequences, or who know and understand from history that every time we go and launch these interventionist regime change wars, we are not only making the lives of the people in these countries worse off and destroying their countries, not just for that generation, but for generations to come, we are also undermining our own national security and taking those taxpayer dollars to spend on these wars that go on for far too long, taking those dollars away from our communities and our people who need them right here at home. How often are these conversations happening? Not nearly enough. So this is why I appreciate so much the opportunity to come here and join all of you tonight, and the fact that Rights and Democracy has made this a priority as we head into this next election and the next election and the next election beyond that, to make sure that every one of us recognizes that it is our responsibility. It's our choice. It's the power that we have within our hands to decide what kinds of leaders we want in this country. Do we want leaders who are bought and paid for by defense contractors, who have no problem writing bigger checks to them without thinking through what is in the best interest of this country? What are our needs for the American people, and how are we addressing them? There was a report that just came out a few days ago, put out by the National Defense Strategy Commission. And in this report, they are recommending that we increase our defense spending to somewhere between 4 to 5% of our country's GDP, which brings us to around $800 billion a year, more than is being currently spent. And their plan takes us down a road to where we would end up spending over $1 trillion a year by 2024. It wouldn't surprise you that this commission is made up of 12 people who are all appointed by both the House and Senate Armed Services Committee leadership, and that those leaders have great ties, obvious ties, through money, through hundreds of thousands of dollars of money to the defense industry. As we see in so many areas in our federal government, whether you're talking about healthcare and healthcare policy, whether you're talking about agriculture policy, whether you're talking about housing policy, as you look down the line, financial policy with Wall Street banks, you can go down the line, and it is glaringly obvious as you follow the money trail to see the direct link between the policies that are being made and who benefits from those policies. And those who benefit from those policies are those who are writing those big PAC checks to the members of Congress who are writing those pieces of legislation. So where does that leave us? We are the ones who have the power to make that change, to make it so that when those bills are being written, to when those policies are being debated, that they are debating about how best to serve the interests of our neighbors, our families, our communities, our states, and the people of this country. Not debating which company will benefit or lose based on the provisions that are in that policy. You know, one of the things that was outlined in this report basically said that we have to continue to increase spending on defense in order to achieve decisive victories against Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, and terrorism. Congress has not declared war on any of these countries. And yet this Defense Commission, authorized by Congress, is laying out the plan to achieve decisive victories over these countries. Where is the conversation about peace? Where is that conversation about how we can determine what the problems are, what the challenges are in our relationships with different countries around the world, and figure out how we can build that path towards peace through talks, through examining what the situation is and what actions we can take that best serve the interests of our country and best serve the interests of peace. Instead, what we hear are a lot of politicians who are ratcheting up rhetoric to go to war with a country like Russia or China, not recognizing the fact of what the consequences are when we are ratcheting up a new Cold War with Russia, the other nuclear power in the world, where we are just a trigger away from launching a nuclear weapon on both sides. We have to be careful and aware about who is influencing our elections in this country. Every one of us does. Whether that's a country like Russia or China or North Korea, or if they are other countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar and others who are paying hundreds of billions of dollars in Washington to try to influence our policymakers, to try to influence the policies of this country. We have to be aware of this. But to say, as some politicians are, that Russia has declared war on America because of what happened in 2016 is dangerous, to say the least. And the rhetoric that continues to be ratcheted up since. This is how they justify continuing to, or how they justify wanting to spend over $1 trillion on revamping our entire nuclear weapons system. We have to be clear-eyed about what is happening around us and hold leaders accountable. We have to recognize those who don't have the foresight that is necessary to see through what the consequences of these policies are and how they impact us here at home. In the money that's being spent and how that impacts everyone in our communities. I talked about the veterans, our veterans who pay the price for this war these wars in a very direct way. But we have to remember that every single one of us, whether you serve in uniform or not, every single one of us pays this price. Ben outlined some very clear numbers of what that price is. So as we seek to address the challenges and the needs that we have in our communities here at home, and we get told by people, well, how are you going to pay for it? Where's the money going to come from? Where's the pay for, as they say in Washington? But they refuse to talk about the cost of these wars. They refuse to talk about the defense contractors who are advocating for more of this and more of that. They refuse to talk about the fact that the Department of Defense has not been audited, the waste and the fraud and the abuse that still exists there. They refuse to talk about the priorities of this country, the needs of our people. We can go down the list of healthcare, of housing, of clean water, clean air, investing in our infrastructure and education. The needs are so great. And we have the resources to be able to take care of every person in this country. It's a question of whether or not our leaders will have the courage and the foresight to make those decisions that best serve our interests. It's as simple as that. And that change that must happen will only occur if we, the people, make it happen. We all know that what I'm talking about is not something that's limited to this administration. This is something that has gone on consistently through both Democrat and Republican administrations for a very long time. This foreign policy that is counterproductive to our own interests. And that's what needs to change. I want to close just by talking about what's happening in Yemen, because this is part of this problem that we're talking about. How are our taxpayer dollars being used? How is that serving our interests or the interests of peace? To have the United States allied with Saudi Arabia, waging a genocidal war, where Saudi Arabia is dropping US-made bombs on tens of thousands of innocent civilians, children in Yemen. Where over 85,000 Yemeni children have died of starvation because of the blockades that Saudi Arabia has imposed. Where you have 22 million people in Yemen who are in need, desperate need of humanitarian aid. We have been pressing and fighting and calling for the administration to put an end for US support for this genocidal war in Yemen. Yet they have refused every time. Not only have they refused, but every time we have tried to bring a bill to the floor in the House of Representatives, it's been shut down, where we are not even able to have a vote. Now, the administration did something that they claimed was in response to these calls. They said, okay, we understand. We are not going to refuel Saudi planes, bomber planes anymore. But everything else is still happening. The United States is still standing with Saudi Arabia, still supporting them. And under the leadership of a president who, in spite of Saudi Arabia's murdering of a journalist in their embassy in Turkey, in spite of Saudi Arabia's continued exportation of this extremist Wahhabi ideology that's fueling terrorist groups around the world, in spite of Saudi Arabia's direct and indirect support of these terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda in places like Syria and Yemen, in spite of this war that Saudi Arabia continues to wage in creating the worst humanitarian crisis in a generation, President Trump says, well, we've got a $110 billion weapons deal with them, and we can't put that at risk. Because look at all the American jobs that'll create. We have business people with a conscience in this country and business people without a conscience. And right now in the White House, we have a businessman without a conscience running this country. And if the best he has to offer the American people to strengthen our economy, to create good paying jobs, is to make bombs that'll be sold to a country like Saudi Arabia to be dropped on innocent people, then we need new leaders in this country, because that is not who we are. We will continue this fight in Congress. Senator Sanders and Senator Lee took one step forward with the procedural vote that took place in the Senate last week to end U.S. support for this war in Yemen. We hope that they will actually pass the bill next week. We've reintroduced our legislation in the House, but time is not on our side, and time is not on the side of the Yemeni people. Never ever forget how much power you have in your hands. I think this is the biggest mistake that too many people make. Thinking that those with the power in Washington are out of control, and yes, they are. But there is a check and balance in this country that lies within the hands of every single American. And so the choice is ours about what kind of change we want to see. And will we do what it takes to make that monumental change, to completely shift the power base away from Washington away from big money, away from the defense contractors, away from those whose entire lives have been built on this foundation of institutional power that has nothing to do with serving the interests of the people of this country. We have it within our ability to take that power from them and bring it back to the people, to those that we care about, for those we care about, for the country that we care about, for the future that we hope will be so much brighter for our kids and their kids and generations to come. Thank you very much for listening.
Hi again, everyone. We're going to take questions in just a minute, but I want to take a few minutes to talk to you a little bit more about some of the work that we're doing. Pat Kinney is here. Is that right? Am I pronouncing that right? Yeah. Okay. Pat has just joined one of our boards. So we have been working together to make some stuff happen here in the Claremont area, but in Sullivan County in general. You don't have to be from Claremont to be part of this team here that's getting built. I really appreciate what Tulsi said about this is up to us. I spent a long time of my life struggling to get by and letting things happen to me that I didn't think were fair, and I didn't think I could do anything about it. And that was really sad when I realized, geez, there is something I could do about it, but I have to get motivated and prioritize what I really want to see change. I personally have lived in the state for 50 years. I left for college a little bit and came back, and I love this state deeply, and it really hurts to see some of the things that are happening here. All over the state, not just in communities like Claremont or in Sullivan County, all over the state. The first part of this year, my job was to coordinate a survey, a listening campaign. I asked over 1,000 people through this survey what issues were most important to them. And guess what? We have a lot in common, all of us. One of the top things that came out of that survey, we do have some reports, and it's on our C3 website, so you can read the whole report. Healthcare, surprise, surprise, is number one. And the overdose crisis, whether it's opioids or now crystal meth is really becoming more of an issue, came out number two, and education, number three. And I know education is really a deep issue in Claremont for a long time here and all over our state. And so it made sense that one of our first house parties that we had a few weeks ago that some of you were at in the audience was about education and how we fund education and how it is not a fair way to pay for our schools. So I really love the idea of using some of the money that we are spending on our military budget to actually put back into our communities. This is really important stuff.
So I say.
Yeah, you go.
So we started the Claremont chapter. We'd like to continue. Our next meeting should be a strategy meeting. And I'm shooting for December 11th, but I need to verify that. I'm sorry, I've got a cold here. But we're looking for people to host house parties in the Claremont area. So let me know if anybody here is available to host parties ongoing. Okay, so we just started, we had one meeting. We need to have a strategy meeting to plan going forward.
Cool. Yeah. Great, yeah, or even any other kind of public space such as this, that would be an acceptable space too.
Right.
I want to take a minute and tell you about a couple of events that we have coming up. Next week on December 5th is a really important event. We have a couple of petitions on the back table, and I'm going to actually pass some of these around. This one is Raise Up New Hampshire. Has anybody heard about Raise Up New Hampshire? This is a campaign we're working on with a coalition of groups. This is our number one thing right now is raising the minimum wage. Can I start this around here and pass that way?
We're Vermonters.
Oh, you're Vermonters, okay. So you probably have your own petition. Anyway, December 5th at 8 a.m., a bunch of allied groups are going to come together at the State House and deliver the petition to the governor and talk to our legislators on orientation day about the needs of our citizens. Having a real minimum wage or a living wage would be even better. This other one is for defending public education. Can I have some here? Dan, I know you, so I'm going for you. Later that day at our office in Manchester, I'm personally hosting a banner making event. It won't be quite like this. It'll be all handmade, kind of. And that will be used for another event that we're hosting on January 2nd at the State House. That's opening day at the State House. We're inviting massive amounts of people to come speak up about the issues that are most important to them. So I hope you can join us. That starts at 8:30. And we'll have a press conference where we'll have speakers from several different members on some of the top issues that we're talking about today. So if anybody wants to talk about that, please come find me after the meeting when we start mingling and eating ice cream. I don't know who I'm turning it over to.
Ice cream, yeah.
But before we get into that, does anybody have questions? Because we want to honor that there might be some questions in the audience for Ben or Tulsi or one of us. Yes.
First, I want to thank you both so much for what you're doing for our country, and everything you said is just right on. And I also want to raise the topic that various people have raised tonight about a Green New Deal, and get your thoughts about that, because the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change gave us some really sobering news, which is that we've got 10 years to massively turn around, drop carbon emissions way down, bring the clean energy industry up. And how can we go about that? What are you doing in Congress, and what do we need to do as citizens?
We actually just had a press event in Washington. I know, it was yesterday actually. Yesterday was Friday, right? Yesterday, sorry. It's like 3 days is packed into one. Yesterday morning, where we had young people who are leaders in the Sunrise Movement from across the country who actually organized it. A few of us who are sitting members of Congress, as well as a handful of the new members of Congress that have been elected, standing in solidarity together to call for a Green New Deal and to call for more support for some of the existing legislation that exists, like my bill that I introduced called the Off Fossil Fuels Act. There's another bill called the Green Jobs Act. There are other pieces of legislation that begin to get at the bottom line, which is needing to build a pathway and a strategy forward for our country where we are completely off of fossil fuels and investing in a clean, green economy. There are a number of elements to this. The Green New Deal, basically what the legislation that they're currently hoping more members of Congress will sign on to will create a select committee in Congress to look at this, come up with legislative solutions, and present a package to Congress, I believe, by early 2020 is the timeline that they've laid out in there. I think it's just important for us, though, and I look forward to being able to be involved in this process as it goes forward, that while we need to talk about getting off of fossil fuels and have a plan to do that, there are many other elements to this, and we talked about some of them. We talked about air, we talked about water. We've got to look at our entire environment. We have to look at big agribusiness and the methane gases that are coming from that industry and how that is negatively impacting our environment, and the other components that need to be addressed. Fossil fuels is a major part of it, but there are many other pieces if we hope to truly make a deep impact on making sure that we all have a livable future for us.
So it seems to me that until we fix the problem with too much money in politics. We're not going to be able to fix any of the other problems. So I'm wondering if you could talk about concrete steps that we
Sure.
can take, starting now,
Sure.
to get the money out of politics.
Absolutely. I think the biggest concrete step that can be taken is to each of us and within our networks and spheres of influence to get every single member of Congress to commit to taking no PAC money. That's a very practical thing that can happen right now.
Yes, yeah.
It's not going to take legislation. It takes the will of the people putting pressure on those who haven't yet made that decision for themselves. Legislatively and constitutionally, we need to take action to end Citizens United.
Yep.
And the third thing I would add, there's a laundry list that we need to go through if we talk about campaign finance reform, ending the corruption in government. I'm working on legislation to address this right now, to address things like James talked about with the revolving door with members of Congress and lobbyists, kind of churning through those who benefit from these industries. People who are working in the military one day writing contracts and the next day retiring and working for the company that they wrote the contract for. Members of Congress doing the same thing, writing legislation that impacts a certain industry, leaving and then going and making over $1 million a year working for that same industry or that same company. Members of Congress who invest in stocks that they benefit from by passing certain pieces of legislation. So there's a lot of different facets to decorrupting our government and focusing it back on the people. But to your question, I think that first, simplest, most impactful thing is ratcheting up the pressure on those who are continuing to be dependent on money from PACs rather than being dependent on contributions from individuals who are taking ownership, saying, hey, yes, I believe in you as my leader, so I'm willing to give you $5 because I'm invested in this collective enterprise.
And we're in a good position to do that, being in New Hampshire, the first primary state. I saw your hand first, so.
Thank you. I want to personally thank you for getting me through the term I'm just finishing in the Vermont legislature.
Oh.
Because I thought I'd landed in hell the first week I got there. And I watched your videos so many times. You kept me sane. I'm serious. I'm not exaggerating. And I would tell all my colleagues, you gotta watch Tulsi. But the thing that I am most amazed at is how you have kept your center. You are in the middle of the real insanity. How do you do that? Because in order for us to talk people into going in and helping you, we got to be able to tell them how.
Yeah.
Because I've watched Peter Welch, who I have a lot of respect for. He's swinging in the wind, and I know he's trying to probably keep his own sanity. But how do you do it?
That's exactly how. Do you want to add to that before I answer?
No, go right ahead.
Okay. What applies to me applies for any of us in our own lives, right? If you're not grounded in your purpose in life, if you don't know what that is, then you will blow with the wind. And you will be distracted by the trinkets that people dangle in front of you, or by people who make the most noise. I'm grateful to have been taught from a young age, but really have learned and made a decision myself from a young age, knowing that the only way to achieve success and happiness in life is by being of service to others. And so I've never, I was 21 years old when I first ran for the State House of Representatives in Hawaii. I had never imagined, dreamed, or fantasized about getting involved in politics or running for office at any point in my childhood, ever. And to be honest, the very first day that I went out and started knocking on doors, I was terrified. I'm the fourth of 5 kids, the most shy and most introverted of all of my siblings. And the anxiety that I felt that day, psyching myself up to have the courage to go and knock on that first door, was extreme. It was tough, but what ultimately got me through that and what ultimately has kept me centered and focused in spite of all of the craziness is understanding that it's not about me. So the fears and anxieties that I had back then were really, what if it's someone mean behind the door? What if they say something not nice? What if I'm not going to know the answer to their question? But ultimately I realized all of those fears were coming from a selfish perspective. Rather than saying, wow, I get to go and meet hopefully a new friend and have the opportunity to listen and hear about the real challenges and hopes and dreams of my neighbors, people in my community. And then to ask them, hey, can I have an opportunity to work for you, to serve you? Staying focused on that purpose that I have chosen for my own life is what keeps me grounded and focused on doing what is right for those that I'm doing my best to serve, and to not be distracted or discouraged in spite the great obstacles that exist. We can't be about the titles or whatever the facades are that exist in places of power, but recognize and remember always that the power is with the people. And in order to make the change that we want to make, it's up to us to make that happen. I also go surfing at home every chance I get.
We've been out dancing every month.
There you go. I have a spiritual meditation practice that I not only start my day with, but practice throughout the day. And so just remaining very grounded and centered on who I am and my purpose in life has been essential for me to continue to try my best to do the work that I'm doing.
So, thank you again, everyone, for putting this together, for having this conversation. I appreciate it. I think we have a room of people who are here for a reason. They want to make a difference. They believe in this message, and we hear about the power of the people. And what I'm looking for as an individual, I can't formulate actionable goals, know who to be connected with, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm going to ask is that somehow what is made available for people who are interested in doing it is a short list of organizations to connected and the goals in order to manage local issues, and also a second list on organizations and goals to be connected with to work on regional and national issues, and have that available maybe on your website. And that would give people who are interested in moving forward the ability to stay connected, to make connections and engage in the appropriate actions. That power may be potentially available, but if people don't know how to connect with it and engage in creating a solution, then it doesn't happen.
Sure.
So we just figured I'd add extra burden, perhaps. Pressure.
Well, I would recommend you get involved with Rights and Democracy.
Yeah. No, it's a valid point, though. I think getting plugged in with organizations who are working on these issues, as well as being able to get access to information, because there's just a lot of misinformation being thrown around.
So I'm already connected with you, and I actually get these emails from End Citizens United. I have some of the pieces of the puzzle,
Yeah.
but I don't have the pieces.
Yeah.
We'll be happy to talk with you, more after this. One thing to know about Rights and Democracy, not only is it a bi-state organization, so Vermont and New Hampshire, but we're part of a number of national networks that are working across these issues, partly because we believe that, we can't solve these things just in our states. Our struggles, certainly we can't end climate change and just here, so we have to be connected across these issues, and they're all interconnected. We can't work on healthcare and not worry about what's happening to the planet, for instance. So talk to us about it. Some folks just got back from a meeting in Nevada with our counterparts around the country working across these issues, and we're continuing to work together.
I appreciate it. I traveled from Grafton County to Sullivan to do this. Maybe you should have this conversation in Grafton County also.
Well, let's talk. Let's talk. I saw Prescott.
Hi, so my name is Prescott. I'm a high school student at the Stevens High School, which is a local school in Claremont. And from the aftermath of Parkland to this Green New Deal, we've seen a complete rejection of student and youth voice from the Trump administration. What do you think could be the solution in order to make sure that we have youth voice inside of Congress?
Well, I can tell you on both of those, students from Parkland as well as young people who are involved with the Sunrise Movement, they are converging on Congress. There's going to be a march coming up, I think, on December 10th, that the Sunrise Movement is leading to talk about the Green New Deal and the need to protect our environment. So there are direct ways to make sure that your voices are being heard physically to be there, but just engaging in the conversations within your local community, we are already, and online, we're already seeing having a great impact. I think more than at any time in my life, voices of young people in high school, in college, people who've just graduated from college, are having a great impact on the national conversation. What can influence a member of Congress the most is when they hear a loud voice coming from their constituency. Because ultimately, they know who votes them in or out of office, who hires and fires them. If what they are getting from home is silence, then they'll go about their business. But on these issues, and there are some of them that come up, they're far and few between, where they hear a loud voice coming through social media, through phone calls, emails, door knocks, people coming to Washington, it does have an impact. So there are many ways to be able to make that influence. And the last thing I'll say is, to that, the power of the grassroots movement and organizing. Having these conversations, and I think we've seen the Parkland students doing this most, where they have gone and had conversations with those who were standing outside and protesting their meetings. Just saying, hey, let's talk. Building those bridges and those connections, where many people in politics never bother to do, has such incredible power to be able to build that common ground and find that common humanity in these issues that impact all of us.
All right, we've got time. All right, one more.
You seem to recognize the problem of methane gas in our environment, and raising animals for food is probably the greatest contributor to global warming. Is Congress actually going to do something about that? It was something that you had mentioned.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Not unless there is a movement built to bring about that change. One thing that we tried to do that was actually driven by the Congressional Staff Veterans Caucus, that they need a member of Congress to sponsor them, so I sponsored them. And so one of their first moves as a caucus was to have meatless Mondays in the cafeteria, in the House office buildings. It was unbelievable how strong and forceful the opposition was to that. And it never happened. Because of that, because of the lobby. I mean, we're talking about these big agribusiness corporations, whether you're talking about the Monsantos of the world, or you're talking about the big meat or big dairy or whatever, and the influence that they have on Congress, the influence they have on the writing of the Farm Bill. So there's a lot of work to be done to help inform people about the negative impact on our environment. And that there is a better way forward for us as people and for our planet that does not require choosing, for a farmer, for example, it does not require choosing between whether or not you will protect our planet or have the economic ability to support your family. there are many opportunities and options available for us, and this is the same thing with the fossil fuel industry. As we're talking about getting off fossil fuels, we don't just say, well, everyone's got to give up driving cars. That's not going to happen. We've got to find a better way to replace the thing that is killing our country or killing our planet with something that's better, a sustainable solution that'll bring us forward, and that's what needs to be done.
Thank you. All right, one last one, and then I'm gonna. I've got two. I've got three.
It's melting.
I did see John first, so I'm gonna call on John.
So
we will have time for questions and mingling afterwards. So when we're having ice cream, so you can ask your question directly.
So I'm very interested in the money part of the conversation tonight, and being that you're a major in the National Guard, you know, I assume you have an appreciation for the importance of the military protecting our country.
Very much.
And so there was a conversation to be had, though, between this idea that there's a $700 billion budget now for the military that Congress's or the Pentagon wants to boost up to $1 trillion. And there is a dollar amount that exists that supports us in a time of peace. Do we know what the difference between that is? And I'm only asking because we can have a conversation about $5 billion to eradicate lead paint in every home in this country, and you know, whatever the cost is to put in affordable health care, and we can talk about it coming from this, you know, discretionary dollar amount. But is there a $100 billion, $200 billion?
That's a great question. What we're working on now, I'm working with my staff and some other kind of expert thought and influential thought leaders in this space, is possibly, and we're still thinking through the ideas on how to approach this, but possibly forming an alternate commission to do just that. To ask the questions about, rather than just saying, well, we need $800 billion to do, to have a decisive victory over these 4 countries, without saying, okay, what is the actual objective? What will that accomplish? Where will that get us? Ask those questions and think through, what is it that we really need to keep our country safe? What do we really need to make sure that our troops are trained and equipped and ready should the need arise? These are the kinds of questions we need to be asking as we're looking at what is that dollar amount. And so we're looking at different vehicles and ways to be able to counter what they're projecting for $800 billion and then over $1 trillion in a few years to a realistic number that actually serves the needs and priorities of our country.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Isaac Grimm for 1 more minute, and then we're having ice cream and mingling. Thanks, everybody.
Can we show a little more love again for Heather and for Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. My name is Isaac Grimm. I'm the organizing director with Rights and Democracy New Hampshire. I will not take up much of your time. You've been sitting for a while. I want to thank you all so much for being here, for engaging in this conversation, and I'm really hopeful that many of us can continue to meet together and build together, because when we're alone and we're isolated, we have no power, and when we come together, there's no limit to the power we can have to make the change that we need, right? And this is not a new thing. As long as there's been oppression and injustice and waste and lack of caring, there have been people who have been coming together to fight against that and who are seeking to live out the values of love that they hold dear in their lives and to make that reality in the world around them. And I'm just really excited to be able to continue meeting with you all and working to do exactly that, to take what can in many ways be a system that's built on greed and on alienation, and turn that into something that can really be the living expression of the values that we all hold the most dear, right? Of love, of care for those around us, of a deep concern for the living ecosystems that we're a part of and that we depend on. And that's only going to happen when we can build the relationships that are based on that kind of love together, and when we can get busy and do the hard work that it takes to make that kind of change. This is something that, I mean, it takes an investment of our time, it takes an investment of our emotion and our energy, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask that if you would all be willing to make an investment to help us actually fund this work. It doesn't happen for free. We're up against some very large and powerful and wealthy forces. And we have envelopes, and if anyone is willing to sign up and give a few bucks a month to help the organization, it makes a huge difference. If that's not feasible, if you can give, a single amount right now, anything helps. We have a bucket in the back that you can put something in. We really, really appreciate your support. And if you are able to give a few bucks a month, that makes a massive difference. So we're happy to pass these around. And we hope you enjoy the ice cream and the mingling afterwards. What are the flavors that we have, Ben?
Oh, we got a lot of flavors. We got the new flavor. We can't resist. We got the caramel almond brittle, that's non-dairy. We got the urban bourbon. We got the chocolate fudge brownie. We got the chubby hubby. We got the and the New York super fudge chunk. That's about it.
Enjoy, you got a lot of choices. Thank you all so much.